Welcome to the 9th episode of Redeeming the Time. I am your host, Jacob Wells. This is my dad, my co-host, Keith Wells. And thank you for joining us for yet another episode.
So if Jacob falls asleep during this, he has been driving 24 hours out of the last 48 hours, doing some videos for our 75th anniversary at the church. So hopefully...
I'm a little tired.
So we're going to talk about numbers in Deuteronomy to wake you up.
It's going to be great. But so we are recording this on the day after Valentine's Day.
Yes, so you missed Valentine's Day for your wife.
We're going to do something. It doesn't have to be on Valentine's Day.
Oh, well.
And anyway, it was a Wednesday, so we weren't even going to be able to do anything anyway. So
You took her to the banquet, though, so that was good. I know this is way after Valentine's Day by the time of this post, but...
I went to the bank? What did you
Banquet.
say? Oh, banquet.
Yeah, our class banquet.
Yes,
there.
that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, so you got to do that.
Went to the bank.
Yeah.
So the Super Bowl happened.
Yeah.
So
Yippee.
Any thoughts on that? We hate the Chiefs.
Chiefs won, yay.
Yeah.
It was
Taylor
disappointing.
Swift fans are...
Today they fired the defensive coordinator for the 49ers.
Really?
The guy that pretty much telegraphed everything that they were going to do, and so. But he did get them there. I mean, so.
The two things that stuck out to me were the unpreparedness for overtime.
Yeah,
Did you see all that?
Yeah,
they didn't know the rules.
They didn't know the rules. They weren't, and they've admitted that.
Yeah, and then
no, the coach did, but the players really didn't.
Yeah, but you want the ball second in these new rules.
I heard Hushman Zato. He kept saying, "No, they're just players like on the chessboard. They don't have to know all the rules." Yeah, they do.
Because no, you need to know the rules.
Yeah,
you need to. That's no.
Yeah, because like at the end when they were all nonchalantly with 8 seconds to go to pass that final touchdown, I'm like, "Go! You got to go!" Apparently, it was going to go into another quarter.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it just.
I mean, the rules have changed every year.
They're better rules.
Yeah, but I just didn't know them. So, I was disappointed.
And then the other thing, Greenlaw, their linebacker, he went down with an Achilles, I think. And
just running in.
Yeah, that changed the game because they targeted his replacement 9 times, and he had like 90 yards on him and a touchdown. So, Yeah.
Oh, well.
So in honor of Valentine's Day, though.
Yes.
I have another. How did you meet your wife? My mom.
I met her here at Friendship. Yep. That's
it? That's all you're going to give us?
I started coming here my senior year in high school. Our church had split. It was sort of an ugly thing, and we went with our pastor for a long time, and some weird stuff just started happening. So we started coming here February of my senior year. She had just recently accepted Christ. Margot Manger and Tanya Copley invited her to come. They were in class together over at Coleraine. I went to East Central High School. Go Trojans. And then we met here. And our very first date was to Jack and Mindy Fisher's wedding, Margot's sister, and the rest is history.
Very nice.
We've never left here. Went through the youth group, college group, the start of a college group here, and we worked with the teens, and on and on and on it went. Got married here. Raised you guys here.
Yep.
Yeah, this is where God has us. So
how
about you?
Well,
Ruth Mullins put you two next to each other in the nursery.
So Callie's was actually born in Missouri, and then they came over here, and when she was real young, and then I was born, and we grew up together. Like
literally in the nursery. Yeah.
It was more growing up. I was her brother's friend, and she was my sister's friend. And then once we got into college and stuff like that, we
went on mission trips together.
Yep. I think we went to 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Before
happened to be in the same groups together.
Yeah, somehow that worked out. the guy who was leading the mission trips somehow had
you two together. I don't know how it happened. Just randomly occurred.
You're a nerd.
We let the Holy Spirit work from there.
Yeah. But I also want to shout out people. Thank you for listening to this. Thank you for commenting and asking questions. Even people that don't go to our church are listening to this, which is pretty exciting.
We appreciate you guys listening, and feel free to ask questions and stuff. I had a really good one. Dave Kane gave me one this week. I haven't even talked to you about it. I'll probably mention it once we get toward the end of Deuteronomy. Man, it really made me sit and calculate some things. That was really good. I enjoyed that. But it's been fun, and we're finishing up Numbers, just a couple chapters left there, and into Deuteronomy. So we're in
so we're in Numbers 34 to Deuteronomy 13.
35, right?
What did I say?
30. You said 34.
35,
yeah, 35. Yeah.
35 through Deuteronomy 13. So
yes.
Monday starts us off with the end of the last two chapters of Numbers, and these are.
Just some, these are just basic things, getting things in line. Numbers 35 deals with the cities of refuge. We've talked about this before. Now there's some real specifications because, remember, the Levites, they don't have an inheritance per se in the land, but they do have cities throughout. So there's 48 different cities, and if you look, they're spread throughout all of the other...
Scattered abroad.
All the other tribes, which... falls in line, fulfillment of the prophecy of their dad Jacob, when he was dying, how them and Simeon would be dispersed. Simeon was reduced; they were dispersed, and then 6 of those 48 cities are called cities of refuge. There's 3 on the east side of the Jordan, where Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh are, and then there's 3 on the west side in what we would consider Israel or Canaan. So, did you get what those were for?
A little bit, but I would like some clarification.
All right.
I have a question here.
So say we're in a situation, and I was throwing rocks, and all of a sudden I threw it over this hill, and it hits this guy, and it kills him. I didn't even know he was there. And it kills him. Yeah. So I run to this city. His family can't kill me there. So I'm in this city, and I stay there until my trial. And if I'm found not guilty of doing this deliberately, if I leave that city, I can be killed by that family, or I stay there and live until the high priest dies, and then I can go back to my city. It's a little odd there. Now, if a person is worthy of death because they actually murdered someone, then that's their verdict, and they're killed. And it's the picture of Jesus Christ here is keeping or protecting the sinner from judgment because of the covering there. So that's what we have here. And then it ends that chapter with God's view on tainting the land with blood. There's a lot. You're going to see that a lot, especially as you get into Deuteronomy over and over and over again, the blood and why that was not to be spilled. So that's the cities of refuge. Interesting. And that will come up over and over as you go through the Old Testament. You'll see people fleeing to a city of refuge. And then we get to the last chapter. And this is sort of a cleaning up, tying up loose ends type chapter, in my opinion.
From a bird's eye view, it's a very odd chapter to
end on. Yeah, I would agree. And it deals with
Zelophehad's daughters.
It's rules for inheritance for the different tribes. So the concern was, this guy died, and Moses said, your daughters get your land. Okay, well, this is the land of Manasseh, and how about one of those daughter wants to marry somebody in Simeon or in Benjamin or wherever it might be? Then what
happens to the land?
Yeah, when they have kids, that would become a Benjamite land, and they would lose part of their inheritance. I thought we talked about this a little bit, I think, a week ago, but same thing going on here. And so the ruling was, if you read through the whole chapter, the ruling is
can't marry outside of your tribe.
Yeah, you got to marry inside your tribe.
Yeah, the woman can't marry anyone outside of it.
Now, other women can marry outside of their tribe, but if they're the one that hold the inheritance for their family, they got to marry inside, which makes sense. and then because this is kept for perpetuity, they have this land. So that makes sense.
Yep.
All right.
So that ends Numbers. We are
4 books
down.
ahead.
It's kind of crazy. Like, I feel like we're flying, but we're only 4 weeks. It's kind of
9th week, and we're in the 5th book. Yeah. So
they are big. They are big though. So Tuesday we get into Deuteronomy.
Yep.
We have the first 2 chapters here.
The first one deals with history. The word Deuteronomy means second law or repeated law.
Yeah, it's not a different law. It's a restatement of the law.
Yes. So remember, you got the first generation that came up out of Israel, and now they've died off, and their kids, those were under 20 years old or that were born during that time, now they've come in, and they're the adults that are going to be going into the promised land. So Moses stops, and he repeats all the stuff that had been said to them back 40 years ago. To us, it looks like, just one perpetual thing that we're reading, but, Moses stated all that stuff up on when he came out of Mount Sinai, and now he's repeating it again some 40 years later, so they don't forget, and so they know.
Pretty much the rest of our reading this week is Moses just repeating stuff.
Yeah, and he's just preparing this new generation as they begin to enter into the promised land. Scofield breaks this book into 7 parts. Chapters 1 and 3, the summary in the wilderness, which we'll look at today, then the restatement of the law, then 4 through 11, then instructions, warnings, and predictions. Then there's some prophecies, his last counsel to the priests, the Levites, and to Joshua is going to be the next leader. Then the song of Moses with a parting blessing, and then it ends with the death of Moses. How's Moses write about his own death? We'll talk about that when we get there, all right? But the chapter itself summarizes from him setting up judges to the disobedience to the 12 tribes of Israel. So that's chapter 1.
Yeah. I just thought it was kind of funny, like, if you didn't read Numbers, you can kind of get a synopsis of what happened.
Yeah, it's the Cliff Notes of what happened, without having to read about how every piece of furniture was put together. Yeah, that's true.
It's a brief synopsis of it.
Yeah, it's sort of like when we get to 1st and 2nd Chronicles, it's just the Cliff Notes of First Samuel through 2nd Kings. Yeah. All right, go ahead.
I just from 9 to 18 we see like the judges that were appointed by Moses, and then for me what I paid attention to, or what was brought to my attention, was the Moses going over the account of the spies and with the new generation. Okay, this is what happened, and this is why we're out here.
This is why you've been wandering around for 40 years of your life. Because for those of you that were 19 years old when this began, or for those that hadn't been born yet and now they're 20 years old, and
And I think it was interesting that he says that it was a good report that they got and they disobeyed going in. So
very good. All right, what day are we on? We on Tuesday?
We're on Tuesday,
right.
Chapter 1.
By the way, if you watch this on Facebook, if you watch this on YouTube, there's markers now for the different days. Jacob started that. It only works on YouTube, not on the other ones. But in case if you're watching that, I know some folks appreciated that. And
thanks to Caleb Bogseth.
Yeah, Caleb knew how to do it. All right.
He thanks to him.
All right. So Deuteronomy 2, we continue the history of the wandering, and this one goes from the wandering through the wilderness to when they killed King Sihon, or the battle with him. This is an interesting chapter. I even used this in a devotion with our staff. There's several promises here. They're promised their land, but throughout this, verse 5, promise kept with Esau for his possession. Edom keeps their land. Verse 9, Lot and the Moabites, they keep their possession. Even though these Israelites are going through there, they could have taken it. No, they're not allowed to. We see that they've already 2 years in. The verse 14 talks about the 38 years of wandering, and 2 had expired since Egypt at that point. But then Lot and his son, the Ammonites, they keep their possession. It's interesting that how God had ordained them keeping their land. But in verses 12 and 22, it's interesting how God ordained the taking of the land from the previous peoples. Those folks get to keep theirs because God made a promise to them. But these other ones, God is forcing them out, and he's ordained them. These aren't stolen lands. These were ordained by God, given to them. And that whole stolen lands thing, we see that a lot in America right now. And land has been taken by the hand of God for centuries upon centuries. And there is a lot of bloodshed that has happened with that as well. But we'll leave that there. Verse 25, it says God goes before them, putting dread and fear in the hearts of those people that they're going to take their land. And then we'll see later on that it's God's hand that's been doing that. Deuteronomy 3 continues the history, and now we go to Og, to the inheritance.
So now we started Wednesday, Deuteronomy 3 and 4. A little side note here that I thought was pretty cool. Like, Moses, in his case, he is making sure that they follow God as they are about to embark into the promised land. And he is reminding the new generation of like what God has done for them. Mm-hmm. So when I was thinking about that on these long drives, we've had 75 years of rich history as a church. We are celebrating the 75th anniversary this year. And we've had those years where God has moved, and today our church has a lot of new faces, and that don't know the history and stuff like that. So these chapters that we're going through, he's kind of recapping them, but also like pulling things out. This is where God moved. And
how important that is.
And I think I was thinking about that because I interviewed people that were there at the beginning, and hearing these stories that I had never heard. And so with the 75th anniversary, trying to pull those out and remind or show the people today the history of our church.
Yeah, and the key to that is showing this is what God has done and what God has continued to do, with the thinking and the mindset that, hey, this God will continue to do this if we follow him, which goes right into chapter 3. Verse 5, we see that he's talking about all these fenced cities were high walls, gates and bars, beside unwalled towns, a great many. He's recapping. I think that Moses is stressing them to give them confidence, because they're going to go into a land. One of the first cities they face is Jericho, with this massive walled city. But they've just conquered some people that were walled. And we find out here too in verse 11 that Og, this guy they killed, I didn't read this. Maybe it was there before, but I didn't read it until here. It says he was a giant. His bed, 9 cubits was the length and 4 cubits the breadth of it, after the cubit of a man there. He's a giant. So they've already killed a giant. And what was one of the things that they were saying, the spies? Oh, there's giants in the land. We're like we see ourselves as grasshoppers. Well, God showed them, well, you stick with me, and we're going to do this.
Yeah.
Then there's a real interesting thing at the end of this chapter that I thought is in verses 25 and 26, Moses requests to God to go into the promised land, and God shuts it down right away.
Yeah.
And it almost looks like he's blaming them. He says, "Wroth with me for your sakes." Is he blaming them for his disobedience? I don't know.
Yeah.
Because a couple times you'll see he says, "Because of you, I don't get to do this." But he does at the end of this chapter, verse 27. He gets to see the promised land, and so we could see that. So we keep going.
Yeah, at the end of chapter 3 as well, you see the announcement that Joshua was going to be which I thought was cool. So chapter 4. Moses continues. He exhorts or commands them to obey the Lord here. He urges the importance of God's laws, his statutes, reminding them that these laws separate them from other nations.
It makes them
And
different, yeah.
Yeah, it makes them the peculiar, special people. And if they follow it, they will gain wisdom, understanding through them. And
yeah, I called this lessons from lessons of Sinai. Verse 2, don't add and don't remove from God's word. I mean, you'll see that throughout the Word of God. Verses 12 through 19, or even 6 through 8, they're witness to the nations by carrying out God's law, as you were saying. Interesting, in 12 through 19, he says the reason that God only spoke to them, that they could only hear his voice and not see his similitude, as the term is, his shape, is because he didn't want them to make idols out of that. He wanted it to just be faith. And yet we still see people doing that. We still see people making, when we were over on that Footsteps of Paul trip, every church we went into, there were idols, statues, and I don't care if you say it's in the shape of Jesus. It's an idol. God tells us he doesn't want us to do that. And then verse 25 through 28 in that chapter, as you're reading through this, I encourage you, look, he's prophetic about their idolatry and then their scattering because of that's going to occur. And he gives this whole thing, and then he reminds them, if you will realize what you've done, and that if you turn back to him, he'll do this. He asks the Israelites to realize how God could, in verses 32 through 38, he wants them to realize, I've never done this with any other group of people that's ever been on the planet.
Yeah.
Please remember this. You have a privilege and a responsibility that no other group has had. And he stresses this to them. And then it ends with showing some cities of refuge there. So.
Yeah, I think the key verse for me is verse 29. But if from thence thou shalt seek the Lord thy God, thou shalt find him, if thou seek him with all thy heart and with all thy soul.
Yeah,
I think that's
the key.
Sums it up. Yeah,
I would agree. Yeah.
So then we get into Thursday,
yeah,
which is chapter 5. What's important about chapter 5? What's cool about it?
Ten Commandments.
The Ten Commandments. Yeah.
The covenant.
As a kid, I always thought that Exodus 20 was the only place that really went over it, and then when I grew up, it was like, oh wow,
it's in other places. Yeah,
it's the reiteration of it. So,
verse 1's an interesting verse to underline there. Just 3 words. It says that I speak all this in your ears this day, that you may 3 things, that ye may learn them, and keep, and do them. So 3 things: learn them, keep them, and do them. All right. So it's not just learn them. A lot of us want to just learn. And, I haven't learned anything new. You've learned a lot, but we're not doing them.
Yeah.
Because we got to keep it in our heart and our life, and then go about doing them. That's the progression that needs to happen there.
And then it goes into the importance of these commandments, like we were saying back in Exodus, like between you and the Lord, which is the first 4, right? And then the next 6 are with fellow man. And
3 vertical. Or 4th vertical, 6 horizontal. I can do math, yes.
You can speak.
Verses 9 through 10, he talks about iniquity visited on the 3rd and 4th generation to those that hate him, and mercy on those that love him and keep his commandments.
Full vertical. I'm sorry.
What?
I'm tired, man. I'm tired.
All right.
Where are we at?
You got to cut this out now, or you?
No.
You've lost your mind? I told you, he might even fall asleep here in a second.
It is
what it is. Verse 25, they were concerned they would die hearing his voice. That's a very interesting thing. I only bring that up because how different is that now? They're talking about when the Lord gave them this, and how concerned they were that they would die hearing his voice. And we today are supposed to come boldly to the throne of grace, and we get help as a child of God. So how drastically different is that? Then we get to chapter 6, and this is the famous chapter. You should just highlight this one.
Yeah.
Circle it. This is called the Shema. I did a whole sermon on this a couple years ago. They would read verses 4 through 9 every time they get together. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. You might have heard that one before. Huh?
I've heard that before.
Yeah. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up, and thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thine hand, and they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes. Scott was talking about how that's where the mark of the beast is going to be someday, on the hand and then between, on the forehead. Very interesting there. But the word of God's supposed to be there instead. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
And thou shalt write them upon the posts of thy house and on thy gates. So this is this whole, they would read this every time they gather. There's some interesting things in here. It talks about in verse 4 how the Lord our God is one Lord.
Yeah.
And that word one here, 1 Corinthians 8:6, one God existing in three persons. This is the Trinity. The word that's used here in the Hebrew is a compound unity. If you think of it, in Genesis 2:24, it says they shall be one flesh when they marry, a compound unity. In Exodus 26:6, when we're talking about the tabernacle being built together, they had all those taches, those gold taches.
Mm-hmm.
There were all of them, but when it speaks of them, it talks about them being at one. So it's a compound unity of that. Ezekiel talks about in Ezekiel 37 the two sticks joined together, which we'll talk about that. But every context deals with this compound unity. That's the Trinity when we see that.
That's awesome. For me, in verses, did you have anything?
No, go ahead.
On verses 13 through 16, this is another one that I have highlighted in my Bible. It talks about God being a jealous God, and it says in verse that's in 15, and then in 16 it talks about tempting God. So those words have negative connotations, and well, obviously, but like what. Tempting God, how do we tempt God? Why is God a jealous God? What does that mean?
Well, to me, that means, is it a wrong thing that you would be jealous if your wife was flirting with someone else? No, that's not a bad thing at all that you would be jealous of that.
You want her, yeah.
Right. She is your bride, and you want her to be faithful and true, and he is a jealous God. He wants no one else to have us. We are his children, and he wants us to be faithful to him. And by tempting would mean that he has to take some action to gain us back.
Yeah.
Whatever that means, chastisement or something of that nature.
Yeah, because it mentions Massa there too, which is as ye tempted him in Massa, which is
each time being disobedient and not grateful and all of those
things. Are we tempting him to
so that's why he gives us this Shema to remind us over and over. And verses 6 through 9 are just something we look at that and like, oh, how do we do that? How do we teach our children diligently when we get up and when we sit down and when we eat and all that? It's exactly, we're to know, share, and talk about God's word.
So then we get into chapter 7, which is a pretty cool chapter for me. I have, as you can probably, I have like a lot of it highlighted. At least the first 6 through 11.
That's interesting. I don't have anything in this chapter underlined. And I do in other ones.
Well, it was kind of what we were talking about in the last chapter, how God chose the Israelites, not for their number, because when they started, they were they were small, but because He loved them, and it just goes in reminding them how He took care of them and that He is God.
Yeah, I entitled this one "Stay Separate." That's what I entitled this one.
Yeah,
He chose them. He expects them. He expects them to destroy the wicked nations.
Yeah.
Even though they're mightier than him. He stresses that too, which is interesting.
Yeah. So it in verses 6 through 11, it's talking about, okay, this is why you're chosen. You are chosen by God, and then because of that, conquer everything. destroy all the other gods. And yeah, I just
Yeah, the focus is
pretty-
on the Lord's strength through this. And what other, this is pretty, this is the MO of how God does things is, that's a terrible way to say that. But he uses the weaker to show only through God.
Yeah.
He's using this smaller, weaker nation to overcome these larger nations, and it's obvious it's only through God that occurs. So, yeah, we see that again.
Yeah. So then we get into Friday, chapters 8 through 10, and chapter 8, it's a reminder of the people, the people of God's provision through the wilderness.
Yeah. Don't forget the Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a punishment that they were out there, but through it, he was.
The Lord quotes Jesus Christ during his temptations. He quotes verse 3.
Okay.
That's one of the, the not. Last part, man doth not live by bread only, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of the Lord doth man live. So we see that. And here's a weird one. Verse 4 shows an amazing miracle that their clothes didn't get old during the 40 years of wandering.
Neither did their foot
So,
swell.
ladies, that you like to have new clothes every so often, how would you like to be wearing that same blouse for 40 years? We used to joke of our daughter Emily, his sister. She loved blouses, and
She's got 8,000 on.
we thought she had in high school she had a lot. We even had a little song with it. I forget what it was, but and
my goodness,
how would you like to wear the same clothes for 40 straight years?
Yeah.
And there's some guy out there who's like, well, I've had the same socks for 40 years. Well, maybe that's true, but they're probably worn. These weren't worn. Interesting, verse 5 introduces the concept of chastening of the Lord. This will be discussed in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 5 through 11. It's a big one over that. But they're reminded over and over, don't forget. I think the key verse to this chapter, in my opinion, was verse 17. And thou say in thine heart, my power and the might of my hand hath gotten me this wealth. No. But thou shalt remember the Lord thy God, for it is he that giveth thee power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he sware unto thy fathers, as it is this day. And then verse 16, if you go back, it says that he used the manna to prove them. Not just to feed them, but he also used it to prove them. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Following me? Even though this might get a little monotonous here. And I would struggle with that. I really would. But we've talked about that before. Chapter 9, we get into, I call it the history of rebellion.
Yeah, I had ancestors rebellion. Yeah. Specifically, he talks about the golden calf incident.
Yeah.
Highlighting how quickly they turned from God. And
he gives the reason why the other nations are going to be cast out, and then he reminds them what happened with that golden calf. Did you notice any new information there?
Yeah, a little bit. I don't remember.
Verse 20, I had never noticed that before. It does not mention this when they're talking about it in Exodus 20.
Oh, having Aaron destroyed?
Yeah, and the Lord was very angry with Aaron to have destroyed him.
Yeah.
Now Aaron's dead, and he's saying this, so he didn't say it before. And I prayed for Aaron also the same time.
Yeah, you didn't hear that in.
Yeah, we don't hear about that in Exodus, because we always how in the world here's this dude's going to be the high priest, and he does this, and we know God gives grace and mercy to those that are faithful.
I think I asked you about that.
Yeah, but we see that here.
Interesting.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. I also thought it was interesting with Moses, not in a boastful way, but he's kind of like, he mentions how many times he interceded for them.
Yeah, he's telling them how it is.
Yeah.
He's an old man. I mean, he can say what he wants to say at this point, and he's letting them know the truth.
Like, you could have been destroyed, but
yeah, I don't think it's boastful.
No, I don't think
I don't take
either.
that as boastful. You could read it that, but I don't believe it.
I think he was just reminding them of what God wanted to do and what he did and what Moses did to
once again showing that our prayers, why God allows that we don't know, but he allows us to, when we intercede, he will hear our prayers and he will sometimes change the course. Deuteronomy 10.
Deuteronomy 10 starts with Moses talking about the second set of stones because he broke the first
Ten
one.
Commandments,
And about the ark a little bit, and then a few reminders in verses 20 through 22. We see, in verses 12 to 19, we see some of the requirements, laws, type of things. But in 20 through 22, it's like the essence of these laws. To fear him, to walk in obedience, to love him, serve him with all their hearts and with all their soul.
Verse 16 is an interesting verse there. This is a verse Jeremiah will repeat in chapter 4, verse 4. And this shows, this isn't always about physical Israel. Now we see some imagery of what we'll see through that leads to the New Testament. Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart. And so we see some change there in the or not change, I would say, an elaboration of the heart of what's coming about.
Yeah.
Deuteronomy 11.
Starting Saturday.
All right. We're only 6 days this week.
This week you get an off day.
Yes, Sunday. Go crazy.
Or catch up, or
use it.
I don't know what happened, but
we don't know what happened with our chart, but nonetheless, it's only 6 days. So.
We're still going to get through the Bible. So,
yeah.
Chapter 11.
I put difference was the, Israel or the Promised Land. He's showing when you go in there, folks, it's going to be different than Egypt. Egypt was a land where the rain happened in other places, and the water would come in and flood the Nile and flood the area, and that's how. Here, they depend on rain, and he recaps the promises there that are with them.
He spells out the reward. He very clearly spells out the rewards for obedience and the curses, the punishment, or whatever for disobedience.
Verse 26, behold, I set before you this day a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
So
he doesn't sugarcoat it. It is right there.
So there's a free will to choose, but there is not a free will to choose the outcome. You can choose if you want the blessings, or you can choose if you want to follow or not follow, but you do not get to choose if you get a blessing or a curse, other than the fact of following the Lord and taking him at his word. So I'll leave it at that. So
getting into anything else in 11?
No.
Deuteronomy 12. The emphasis is again separation. I have of God's people. I don't know how many times this has been stated so far, but at least 6 or 7.
The one that stuck out for me in this chapter, I saw that over and over. But the one thing that stuck out over and over is 3 times it mentions the place that he has chosen, God has chosen for them to come and worship. He does hearken in verse 8 to their future disobedience during the Judges. When you're reading that, you look into that. But verses 5, 14, and 26, he said there was going to be one place in which they were supposed to bring their sacrifices. And I think this is done just to in my opinion, keep the worship focused properly. It would eliminate idol worship and the whole thing that we see in it. It would keep people from doing that which they thought was right in their own eyes. Mm-hmm. No. You don't just randomly get to do this. I go to church on the golf course, or I go worship the Lord when I'm out in the forest. No, that's not how God has told us to do this. God has given us a place, and that is church, to where we are to come and we're to worship the Lord. Now, we can go minister in all of those different areas, but God has clearly pointed out, and that's what he's showing them here.
Yeah.
This is the spot that this is supposed to occur. You don't just get to willy-nilly decide what you want to do. I'm getting a little fired up on that.
Preach. For me,
there's definitely a sermon there.
The emphasis of no other gods being worshipped.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that we can apply to our lives as well. Like, it's not just saying it doesn't just say don't worship other gods, but it also, he wants them to destroy the places,
Yeah.
like you were saying.
Eliminate.
Eliminate them. Why? So that they want to be tempted. Get rid of not just the sin, but the temptation of the sin as well.
Yeah.
Like, because if they're there, I mean, you'll see it. Like, people go into them and,
Yeah, don't put
what's
it,
this about?
Don't put it in a box and put it over in the corner in today's world.
And
Get rid of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't allow. If it's something you've got an issue with on your phone, get rid of it.
Yeah.
Don't go to those places. Don't have those friends. You know, if it's that severe.
Because if you keep seeing it and keep seeing it, your flesh is weak.
Yeah. There is going to be a weak moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just eliminate it altogether.
So that was the thing that.
And then we end on the weirdest chapter to end on a week.
So, yeah, Numbers ends in a weird way, and this week ends in a weird way.
Yeah.
Chapter 13, it goes...
well, it goes right with what you were talking about.
Yeah.
God takes idolatry seriously.
Speaks on false prophets, the punishment there.
Put them to death.
Yeah.
And then verses 6 through 11. This was tough. If you've got a family member that was enticing you... Now, remember, this is during the law. This isn't in grace, but this is... If you had a family member that was enticing you to idolatry, they're to be stoned, even if it's a family member. And it says in verse 11, the key here, and all Israel shall hear and fear. He wants this completely eliminated. And then he goes in 12 through 17, if there's a city, that Israelite city that is following idols, and it's confirmed, it's not just like one person, it has to be confirmed. They're supposed to be destroyed, killed, even their animals, and you burn the city, and it's never to be rebuilt. And to keep people from like saying, oh yeah, they're doing that and stealing all their goods. No, even their gold and all their possessions were supposed to be burnt. Eliminates any false accusations or greed. I mean, he is showing them this has to be eliminated.
Yeah. Do you think he takes idolatry serious?
I think so. Yeah, I think he does.
Yeah.
And, well, that's what we end on today. I looked at 14. I thought maybe we could do one extra chapter, but it's dealing with similar type things, so we'll deal with that next week.
Yeah.
But good job. You finished 4 books, and now you're halfway through, or at least a third of the way through Deuteronomy. And, good job. I think that's great.
Yeah.
And many of you are catching up or keeping up. Remember, if you get too far behind, just start where we're at this week. Start at those last 2 chapters in Numbers and get going. And we'll get through this together and learn together. It's not getting through. It's, embracing this together. So.
Yeah, we appreciate the comments. I know some of you have...
Oh, you didn't give the email address this time.
Oh, yes. The email address is redeemingthetimepod@gmail.com if you want to send us some comments, questions, concerns.
Concerns? Hopefully no concerns. All right.
Part of the link.
So how are we ending today? With you half asleep, do you have a...
I have a joke, of course.
Oh, boy, oh, boy.
It's about driving.
Oh, okay.
Kind of. Not really.
I have not heard these jokes. I promise you. I'm not...
He loves them.
My groans are legit.
I've heard... I don't know. I've had more... Not more people, but I've had a lot of people come up. I liked your joke. Nothing about anything else. So at least somebody...
I woke up for the joke.
Yeah. At least somebody likes them.
All right, let's hear it.
What kind of car does an egg drive?
What kind of car does an egg drive?
Leave in the comment if you know the answer.
Oh, man. An eggscape?
No, that's good.
Right.
That's good, but a Volkswagen.
Oh, that's just as bad.
It's as good. It's better. Well,
all right. Well, you guys have a good week.
Yep. We will see you in the next one.
All right. Bye.